The scent of truffle oil and old money hung heavy in the air, a fitting backdrop for my husband's triumphant dinner with investors. He had no idea I was about to serve him his own empire on a silver platter. The clinking of silverware against fine china was supposed to be the soundtrack to my husband's triumph. We were at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive you couldn't find it on Google Maps, only through whispered recommendations. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and old money. Across the table sat Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, the potential investors Mark had been courting for months. This dinner was the final play, the moment he would secure the funding to launch his company's new tech division. His company. That's what he always called it. And tonight, I was playing my role. The supportive, smiling, silent wife. I smoothed down my silk dress, a deep sapphire that complemented my skin. Mark had picked it out. "We need you to look the part, honey," he'd said, a phrase that sounded like a compliment but felt like a leash. Elegant, a little bit exotic. The Hendersons will love it. I smiled then, and I was smiling now, a carefully constructed expression of serene adoration. Inside, a familiar knot of ice was forming in my stomach. For the past year, Mark's ambition had curdled into something ugly. The man I married, the one who saw me as his equal, had been replaced by a performer who saw me as a prop. And that's when I realized the market was completely untapped, Mark was saying, leaning forward with that charismatic gleam in his eye that made people sign checks. He was brilliant, I'd never deny that. But he was also rewriting history, one anecdote at a time. I built this company from the ground up, with nothing but an idea and a whole lot of grit. He conveniently left out the part where my inheritance, the money my father had worked 3 jobs to save, was the ground he built it on. He forgot that my business degree and market analysis were the blueprints. Mrs. Henderson, a woman with diamonds in her ears and steel in her eyes, turned to me. "It must be so exciting, watching your husband build such an empire, dear." Her smile was polite, but her gaze was shrewd. She was testing me. I opened my mouth to give the practiced, demure answer Mark and I had rehearsed, but he cut me off with a hearty laugh. "Oh, Imani is my rock," he said, placing a heavy hand on my knee under the table. "She keeps the home fires burning so I can go out and slay the dragons. She's not much for the nitty-gritty of balance sheets and Q4 projections, are you, sweetheart? Her talents are more creative." He squeezed my knee, a clear signal to just smile and nod. The Hendersons chuckled politely. The knot in my stomach tightened. Creative. It was his go-to code word. It's what he said when he dismissed my strategic input as artsy daydreaming. It's how he described the woman who designed the company's entire branding and UI, a design that had won industry awards. Mr. Henderson, however, wasn't letting it go. He looked directly at me, past Mark's beaming face. "Still, you must have some insight. What do you see as the company's biggest challenge in the next 5 years?" The table fell silent. It was a direct question, a professional one. This was my chance to be more than a pretty prop in a silk dress. I took a breath, my mind already formulating an answer about market saturation and the need for diversification. "Well, I believe the primary obstacle will be," I started, my voice clear and confident. But Mark's laughter boomed across the table again, louder this time, jarring and dismissive. "Oh, darling," he chuckled, shaking his head as if I were a child who'd wandered into a boardroom. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that." He turned back to the Hendersons, a patronizing smirk on his face. "I'm sorry. She tries to keep up. It's adorable. What Imani is trying to say is that she has complete faith in my vision." He then leaned towards me, his voice a stage whisper meant for everyone to hear. "Stick to what you're good at, honey. Picking out color palettes and planning parties." The humiliation was a physical blow. It sucked the air from my lungs and sent a hot flush crawling up my neck. He hadn't just dismissed me. He had belittled my intelligence, my contributions, my very identity, reducing me to a stereotype in front of the 2 people who held his future in their hands. He was so caught up in his own performance, so sure of my silent compliance, that he'd forgotten who he was talking to. He had forgotten that my father didn't just leave me an inheritance. He left me his entire portfolio of controlling shares. Mark was the CEO, the face, the brains, as he liked to call it, but I was the silent owner, the 51% majority shareholder. He saw me as the heart of the company, but he forgot the heart is what keeps the whole thing alive. I met Mr. Henderson's gaze across the table. He wasn't laughing. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. Mark continued to prattle on about projections, completely oblivious. The performance was over. My smile didn't falter, but something inside me shifted, hardening into resolve. I slowly picked up my wine glass, took a delicate sip, and placed it back on the table with a soft, definitive click. Then I cleared my throat. The sound I made wasn't loud, just a gentle clearing of my throat, but in the sudden quiet of the table, it felt like a gavel striking wood. 4 pairs of eyes snapped to me. Mark's face was a mask of strained patience, the smile plastered on but not reaching his eyes. He was already annoyed that I'd broken my silent prop wife script. The Hendersons, however, looked genuinely curious. I gave them a small, genuine smile, the first one of the evening, and directed my words to Mr. Henderson, completely bypassing my husband. That's a very insightful question, Robert. And Mark is right, in a way. I'm not concerned with the day-to-day balance sheets. Mark's posture relaxed slightly. He thought I was about to retreat to play the part he'd assigned me. I let him have that moment of false security. I'm more concerned, I continued, my voice steady and even, with the long-term structural integrity of our market position. His projections are optimistic, and I admire his passion. However, they fail to account for the aggressive Q3 expansion of our main competitor, Syntec, into the Northern European market, a move that directly threatens our projected 15% growth in that sector. I commissioned a risk analysis report on it last month. I assume you haven't had time to read it yet, Mark? The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then a flash of anger. He looked as if he'd been slapped. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't been emotional. I had simply stated facts. Facts he clearly didn't know. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. "You commissioned a report?" she asked, her tone shifting from polite interest to sharp focus. "Of course," I said, taking another sip of water. "One can't steer a ship this large by looking only at the horizon. You have to be aware of the currents beneath the surface." Mark finally found his voice, forcing a rough, unconvincing laugh. "Honey, what on earth are you talking about? Syntec is small fry. Don't bore our guests with departmental minutiae. This is the big picture dinner." He tried to pat my hand, a gesture of condescending comfort, but I moved it away to adjust my napkin. "With all due respect, Mark," I said, finally turning to look at him, my gaze level and cold, "a potential $30 million threat to our revenue stream is not departmental minutiae. It's a foundational risk to the very expansion you're asking the Hendersons to fund." I turned back to the investors, which brings me to my second point of concern, the Odyssey project. Mark's plan involves diverting significant capital from Odyssey to fund this new division. What he failed to mention is that the Odyssey project is our primary R&D initiative for developing proprietary AI learning models. It's not just a side project. It's our future. Stripping its funding is like selling the engine to buy new hubcaps. Mr. Henderson put down his fork. He was no longer looking at Mark at all. His full, undivided attention was on me. "You seem to be extremely well informed, Imani." Mark's face was turning a blotchy red. "Imani, that's enough," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You're embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I simply raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Am I?" I asked softly, then returned my focus to the Hendersons. "The truth is, this company's greatest asset is its innovation pipeline. A pipeline that I have personally overseen financial allocation for since its inception. My primary duty is to protect the company and its core assets. The plan my husband has presented tonight is, in my professional opinion, reckless. It prioritizes short-term, flash-over long-term stability." The final thread of Mark's composure snapped. "Her professional opinion?" he spat out, the charismatic facade crumbling to reveal the snarling desperation beneath. "She has no professional opinion. She's my wife. She plans charity galas." Mr. Henderson held up a hand, silencing my husband with a single, calm gesture. He looked at me, a glimmer of understanding and perhaps respect in his eyes. "So, what would you propose, Imani?" he asked. And that was it. The question, the acknowledgement, the transfer of power. I looked at my husband, at his furious, bewildered face, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear sense of purpose. I gave the Hendersons a confident smile. "I'm glad you asked," I said. "First, let's talk about the leadership of this new tech division, because Mark will not be running it." Mark's jaw literally dropped. He stared at me, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, fury, and utter disbelief. It was as if his brain couldn't compute the words I had just spoken. "What did you just say?" he stammered, his voice a dangerous mix of a whisper and a roar. The Hendersons, however, were completely unfazed. If anything, they seemed intrigued, leaning in as if the real main course had finally been served. I ignored Mark's sputtering and kept my eyes fixed on Robert Henderson. The new division requires a leader with a deep understanding of both market risk and R&D synergy. Someone who won't cannibalize our future for a splashy press release. Mark is a fantastic salesman, an unparalleled visionary for big ideas. He secured this dinner, after all, but he is not an operator. His talents are better served as the face of the company, not as the architect of its most critical new venture. I was dismantling his kingdom with calm, boardroom-approved language, and he knew it. Each word was a precise, calculated blow. "And who," Mark seethed, his knuckles white as he gripped his steak knife, "did you have in mind to run it? You?" The insult was clear. The idea was so preposterous to him, so far outside the tiny box he had built for me, that he thought it was a checkmate. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark," I said with a cool smile. "I already have a job. My job is to ensure the person in charge of our company's future is the most qualified candidate, not just the one with the loudest voice." I slid my clutch from my lap onto the table and opened it. Inside, nestled next to my lipstick, was a slim leather-bound portfolio. I passed it across the table to Mr. Henderson. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, head of R&D at our biggest competitor until last Tuesday. He's been quietly courted for weeks. He has a non-compete, of course, but it doesn't apply if he's leading a division with a fundamentally different operational charter. A charter I drafted. You'll find it in the second tab. Dr. Thorne has already agreed in principle, pending board approval." Robert Henderson opened the portfolio. His eyes scanned the first page, then flicked to the second. A slow smile spread across his face. He looked over at his wife, who gave a subtle, impressed nod. The entire conversation now excluded my husband. He was no longer the main character. He was a spectator at his own execution. "This is comprehensive," Mr. Henderson said, looking up at me. "Very impressive." Mark finally erupted. "Board approval? What board approval? This is my company. You went behind my back. You've been plotting this." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and pathetic. He looked like a king whose castle had just dissolved into sand. I finally turned my full attention to him, my expression unreadable. "No, Mark, I haven't been plotting. I've been governing. There's a difference." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. "You seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of our corporate structure. You call it your company, but a CEO is an employee, Mark. An important one, but an employee nonetheless. The final authority rests with the majority shareholder." His face went pale. It was the slow, dawning horror of a man realizing he'd been playing chess against a grandmaster while thinking it was checkers. He was connecting the dots. My inheritance, my father's business acumen, my quiet presence at every quarterly review. He thought I was just there to support him. He was finally, truly, seeing me. "The shareholder," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "Yes," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "The 51% majority shareholder. Me." Mrs. Henderson let out a low, appreciative whistle. Robert Henderson closed the portfolio and slid it back across the table to me. "Well," he said, a broad grin on his face, "it seems we've been negotiating with the wrong person all evening." He extended a hand to me. "Imani, I think your vision for this company is far more robust. We're in. Let's have our people draw up the paperwork based on your proposal." I shook his hand, my grip firm. "I look forward to it, Robert. The rest of the dinner was a blur of professional pleasantries and strategic discussions between myself and the Hendersons. Mark was utterly silent, a ghost at his own feast. He just sat there, staring at his plate, the carefully constructed empire in his mind razed to the ground. When the Hendersons finally left, praising my strategic foresight, the silence Mark left in their wake was deafening. He didn't look at me as we waited for the valet. He didn't speak in the car. It was only when we walked through the front door of our large, empty house that he finally turned to me, his eyes hollow. "Why?" was all he could manage. I placed my keys on the marble entryway table and turned to face him. No longer the smiling prop, no longer the supportive wife, but the woman he had underestimated for the last time. "You humiliated me, Mark," I said simply. "You forgot that the woman you treated as a decoration was actually the one who owned the gallery. You wanted me to look the part tonight. So I did. The part of the person actually in charge." He had no response. There was nothing left to say. He had built his world on a lie he told himself so many times he started to believe it. And tonight I had simply shown him the truth.